Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of James D Podcast. We're spinning the James Split Sea, and today we are going to be talking about the 35th anniversary of a particular record. We're going to be talking about Graceland by acclaimed musician Paul Simon. We've wrapped up our weekly episode this week, which is on Boldy James and the Alchemist Bo Jackson, as well as the new album by the Killers, Pressure Machine. So if you haven't seen that already, please go check it out and then come right back here when we talk about Graceland.
Yes. So this is sort of a one, not really part of a series. It's a one-off anniversary video. We do occasionally do those. The last one we did was for an album that also turned 35 this year, Peter Gabriel's So. Jake, you weren't with us for that review, but I know you do like that album a lot and you're familiar with it enough to talk about this record in the context of that one. And both, I guess, on the surface, these records that are these kind of huge canonical pop records from 1986, a year which honestly, for a lot of the major artists, unless you were in the heavy metal scene, it wasn't really a particularly great year for music outside of these big artists. And yet Peter Gabriel with So and Paul Simon with Graceland dominated in these very distinct ways. Like the surface level comparison is that they both incorporate elements from specific tribal musics of Southern Africa in certain aspects. Graceland to a far larger extent than So, but that's, I guess, the surface level comparison. But also you can think of it in terms of Paul Simon and Peter Gabriel as these well-established and entrenched figures in music who had this classic era of their influence, of their relevance in the late 60s, early 70s to the music they were making then, who then went through a period where they were comparatively out of the spotlight. It's not really, Peter Gabriel never really fell off, but he was always kind of a figure in progressive rock music, and he was never really seen as a person with pop music potential until he displayed that potential and actively sought it out with Daniel Lanois on So. And for Paul Simon, Graceland comes after a period of considerable inactivity and some failed albums in the sort of late 70s, early 80s that did not do very well at all. It also comes for him at a time of great personal turmoil as well. His partnership with Art Garfunkel has fallen by the wayside pretty strongly. And this also is, in some senses, a divorce album following his separation from Carrie Fisher, whose influence on his music and his life and their relationship and their sort of torrid marriage it's not really a topic of this album, but it's kind of like this contextual overhanging thing. She's referenced obliquely a couple of times on this record as well. And it's more, I guess, relevant to the extent that this is a comeback album for Paul Simon in the same way that not really that So was a comeback album for Peter Gabriel. It was like a kind of a rival album. But Graceland is within this fabric of 1986 pop records. It's kind of like approaching the same sort of significant moment of greatness, but from the other direction, whereas Peter Gabriel was kind of steadily building towards So, Paul Simon made Graceland as a kind of course correction because his career was going down the shitter, and inadvertently in the process made his most enduring, his most influential, and his most culturally impactful album, I would argue, just not to denigrate any of the music he made with Garfunkel, but the wide reaches of Graceland into all aspects of indie music, pop music, basically every sphere you can think of, as well as the introduction of world music into the Western sphere of popular music, cannot be understated. If you were existing in a Western place before 1986, your exposure to the music of, Eastern countries, of Southern Africa, of the various cultures that come there, you would only be experiencing that if you're actively seeking it out. And it certainly was not fashionable. But the incredible impact and lasting legacy of Graceland is not only that it introduced the Western world to a lot of tribal South African music, it's that it made that fashionable and it made that a part of the mainstream, and it laid the groundwork for generations of music and of integrations of various cultures into the Western framework. And one thing I want to address off the bat is that I see some people really lazily, particularly in the current era, accusing this album of cultural appropriation. And
that was coming.
Well, it's something we have to address because I don't think a lot of people dig this, but dig into this, but it's something that I've seen some perspectives voiced. And I have to say, I think it's utterly ignorant to accuse this album of cultural appropriation, because in order to do that, you have to completely ignore the way this record was made, its inherently collaborative nature, and the net positive impact that it had on the lives of all of the people who were involved, all of the cultural groups that were involved, and also the context of when this record was made, which was in the middle of kind of apartheid. So a lot of the cultures that this record draws from and incorporates are specifically South African cultures. I want to get this right as well. The music of specifically, I think the heaviest is Mbakanga music, which is known as township jive music, which originated specifically as the street music of Soweto, South Africa. And Paul Simon stumbled across this when working with another musician, I think, became aware of this music and then became enamored with it. And this is the reason you can't really credibly accuse Simon of pure cultural appropriation, is that it's not just that he saw this musical sound and aesthetic and thought, great, I'm going to build this, LA, New York pop record around that. It's that it's essentially an example. It is essentially a record that is that music that he is kind of grafting himself into, in the sense that he is a part of the community. Like, he's inviting the figures at the forefront of these musical groups to come and decide the direction of this album with him. It is 100% collaborative the entire way through. And it lifts up these voices. It crucially credits these voices and paid them handsomely as well. Like, I think that they were paid something like $400 an hour to be on this record because of the budget that Simon had. And so, yeah, I just think that the accusations of cultural appropriation, which incidentally always come from white people, are just really, really facile and don't really actually look at what this record is doing. The whole point of making it for Paul Simon and the actual contributions of the people from Soweto on this record, which are numerous, which go across every single track, which permeate both vocals and instrumentation and arrangement and composition, and completely create a new fabric and a new framework for pop music. And I've been thinking about this throughout the week. I don't know if this is probably one of the most innovative records we've ever reviewed in that respect, in the sense that it basically carves out a new niche for Western pop music by incorporating in an inclusive way the voices and the perspectives and the sounds of a non-Western world. And what's meaningful about that, beyond just how neat that is as a concept, is that it's also kind of a form of protest in its own context as well, because this record was made during apartheid, when Simon was actually criticized by the UN for working with South African musicians and, essentially working with people in this oppressive environment, despite the fact that he was lifting up the people who were being oppressed. It tells you a lot about this particular context that happened. And so, not to say that, Paul Simon was this brave, heroic figure who didn't give a... Yeah, it's not a white savior thing. It's just that basically what he was doing was heavily condemned, because it was this idea that, well, if you're making music with South Africans, regardless of the specific cultural group they come from, you're inherently implicit in apartheid. It's like the same sort of thing where people say to like bands like Radiohead or whatever, well, if you go and play shows in Israel, then that means that you're complicit in Palestinian oppression, which, bit of a reach, my guy. You know what I'm saying? Like,
a little bit.
There can be, you can want to go and play music to your Israeli fans in Israel without condemning, without like saying that you are fucking Zionist or whatever. Like it's people just look for controversy. And so I wanted to get that out of the way front and center, because it seems
Probably
to
best.
it seems to dominate a lot of the background of this record really unfairly. And I want to talk about, I'm sure you all have opinions about these songs and stuff, but I want to talk about, now that that's out of the way, what the overwhelming impression I get listening to this record, which is that I think it's one of the most joyful pop albums of the 80s. It is pure delight listening to this album, which is funny because there are some dark subject matters addressed on songs like The Boy in the Bubble, for instance. But broadly, this is an absolutely euphoric album, and the voices on this record sound euphoric. The arrangements are beautifully dynamic and fluid and exciting and funky and fun, and the incorporation of a cappella vocals, and just generally the production as well is so rich and spacious and gorgeous, and huge and wonderful, with one exception that I'll get to eventually, of one song where I think there's a bit of a production mistake. But it's not a perfect album, but it's a pretty fucking great one. And you're immediately struck as you go into it, as these scenes are set. First of all, something that I think is really, really underappreciated is that Paul Simon, which is funny to say considering this is Paul fucking Simon of Simon and Garfunkel, but dude is a fucking underappreciated lyricist. Like, he's a great songwriter. And it's not just that he's a great songwriter when he's writing fucking Hello Darkness, my old friend, fucking whatever. He's a great, and people see this as Paul Simon pop album, cool, but like, he's writing proper songs and shit here. Like, the scenes he sets, and the way that he sings is so compelling and powerful. I mean, I'm just going to read some lyrics from Boy in the Bubble, which is one of my favorite Paul Simon songs. I believe these are the days,
fucking masterful.
I believe these are the days of lasers in the jungle, staccato signals of constant information, a loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires, and baby, these are the days of miracle and wonder. This is the long distance call, the way the camera follows us in slow-mo, the way we look to us all, the way we look to a distant constellation that's dying in the corner of the sky. These are the days of miracle and wonder, and don't cry, baby, don't cry, don't cry. That shit is bone chilling. And the images in this song, the image in the song of this, like, it's a song about this apartheid state of South Africa where there's this violence and murder happening all of the time. And he immediately sets that with this just simple thing where it was a slow day and the sun was beating on the soldiers by the side of the road. That's one of the most, it's as iconic an opening line for an album as I think you can get, right? Because you're immediately thrown into this scene. And a shattering of shop windows, the bomb in the baby carriage was wired to the radio. My God, dude, it's like, and this is the thing, like, I've always liked this album a lot, but I've just gotten so caught up in how great it sounds that sitting down to prepare for this review and actually reading this lyrics, it was like, holy shit, my man is going handy, as they say here in New Zealand. So
do they?
Yeah, Hundies, bro. But yeah, anyway, I just went off completely there. But this album, welcome to the world of Graceland, right? It's this joyful record for a lot of reasons that we'll talk about, but it's like an emotionally complicated joy, right? Like, it doesn't deny the oppression existing in the landscapes where this music is coming from, but it like accepts it as a state of being and then focuses on the joy that comes from persisting. And it's kind of like, and not dissimilar to the feeling of the Killers record we talked about in our main episode this week, right? Pressure Machine, where these are songs about this dour, downbeat landscape where people are suffering, and yet they're surviving and they're living and they're thriving. And that's what the record focuses on. I think it's much more true of this record than that one, focusing on the thriving. But, you know, it's like, I have to believe that to a certain extent, Paul Simon writing a song like Boy in the Bubble and setting that scene had to a certain extent, have had a large impact on how the West perceived apartheid and the crisis, and their understanding or ignorance of that being harder to ignore. I have to believe that Paul Simon writing a song like this had to have had some influence on the changing perceptions and the greater awareness of it in America. And so that automatically gets big points in my book, even beyond it just being an awesome sounding song.
Yeah, the sound of it is what immediately kind of stuck out to me. Like upon first listen, this is one of those weird records where we cover it on the podcast and it's like really, really culturally ubiquitous. And when I go and listen to it, and it's like, we've covered albums like Carole King's Tapestry, where it's like I'd never listened to the album, but I had heard basically all of it throughout my life. Whereas I had only heard one song on here, and it was so divorced from the context of the record that it didn't even like hit me. So I didn't really know what Graceland sounded like, and I just didn't expect it to be so like, and again, this is probably partially my fault for only being familiar with mostly, albeit a lot, but mostly just Simon and Garfunkel through their singles. But like, I'm vaguely familiar with stuff like Bridge Over Troubled Water, but then this comes along and it's just so, I guess the right word is like bouncy. It's vibrant. It's so shimmering and bright, and it never really like, even when you have songs like The Boy in the Bubble, which it's just like comparatively super downbeat and like really kind of dark and morbid, the music itself is always kind of, I won't say it's like in contrast with it, but it's like it's almost like it's actively fighting against it. It's like it's like displaying a struggle through like music and lyrics constantly colliding with each other. And then occasionally there will be moments where they're in kind of a bit more of a synchronicity, like on the title track that immediately follows it, which paints, Graceland as this idea of basically like this heavenly place. And he talks about a girl who calls herself the human trampoline and stuff, and being caught up in the swell of the travel to there and finally understanding what she means. And it's just, I'm really, it's so immediately arresting. And I also think it's interesting it comes out in combination with the album that we talked about already, which is Peter Gabriel's So. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of the drums here at least sound like they have gated reverb, which was a pretty big deal for Peter Gabriel to come on like and sort of really heavily employ that from In the Air Tonight. And it's on here as well, but the difference in how it's actually used is so different. It's like it's sort of a part of the bigger woven tapestry at hand, instead of like the center focus where it is in that song where it's like like that's like it's really trying to draw your attention to that, whereas here it's way more focused on being of a piece with something else.
Yeah, like I think the spaciousness of this record is actually kind of a good contrast against So, because the thing about that record is that even though Peter Gabriel became known for the gated reverb thing, it's like that record actually doesn't have much gated reverb on it. Like it's really sharp and stuff, and not dry, because Daniel Lanois's production gives it this real weight that it never makes it feel dry or stale. And the synths are so warm on that album too. But in contrast, Graceland is like this weird cocktail of sounds where and that is of course due to the influence of the tribal music and of the specifically the Mbakanga sound, and the musicians of that scene who are performing on this record. But it is then woven into the fabric of these 80s pop conventions in a way where each is accentuating the other. It's not like the 80s pop conventions, the gated reverb that you hear, and all those sorts of sonic signifiers are like making up for weaknesses in the, Mbakanga aspects of the music. That's not it at all. And nor is it that the Mbakanga aspects of the music are, apologies by the way if I'm pronouncing that wrong, it's not like those aspects are I guess making up the difference either. There's this real sense of like it's all integrated and interwoven together, and as a result of it, the best songs on this record really hold as these strong centerpieces of all of these things come together. Although you do get moments on this record that are more spare that also work, like Homeless, for instance, which is mostly a cappella, and I absolutely adore it because the vocals sound so great and moving and powerful and fun and great. But also, yeah, generally in those really classic songs like You Can Call Me Out and specifically Graceland, which I think is, again, a masterpiece of a song. I have to say, those first two songs back to back are an incredible 1-2 punch of an opening track, of an opener to an album, especially with Boy in the Bubble being, this kind of setting the scene in this, harsh, sun-beaten, apartheid landscape, and then Graceland being this like journey to transcendence as a form of escape. Like the two songs comment on each other. I am following the river down the highway through the cradle of the Civil War. I'm going to Graceland. It's just again, the lyricism here. She comes back to tell me she's gone, as if I didn't know that, as if I didn't know my own bed, as if I'd never noticed, which incidentally is a line specifically about Carrie Fisher. The way she brushed her hair from her forehead as she said, losing love is like a window in your heart. Everybody sees you're blown apart. Everybody sees the wind blow. I mean, Jesus Christ. And so these two songs really kind of set the scene for the album, I think, and together in tandem. And there are these beautiful immediate realizations of what this new aesthetic for Paul is. And for them to be so fully realized is such a thrill. And then the rest of the record explores them throughout a series of songs in different ways that are, sometimes more focused, sometimes more singular, sometimes more playful, sometimes more spare, but always interesting, I think.
Yeah, shit whips. Just by its very nature, really. I'm never going to prefer it to like 90% of Simon and Garfunkel's back catalog. But it's also wildly different in really rewarding ways. And it is definitely one of those things where it was like when we reviewed Tapestry, like Jake said, where it's just like, I've heard all this, basically, especially something like You Can Call Me Out, which has probably played at every baseball game since its release.
Yeah.
And like, fucking hell yeah.
I
play it again.
I mean, how many fucking pop songs have a penny whistle solo in them?
It's just so good.
It's just like, it's this great little detail, this great little touch that adds so much to it. And I think like you get so swept up in those synths, which are great. But there's also like so much else happening in the song that's awesome too, down to the last detail, like how peppy and light to the touch those little guitar licks are in the song. And then how swooping that gated percussion sound is. It's just like a perfect pop song and assembly. It's just so fun and bouncy, and like the way that Paul is kind of writing it, he has this great, I love his cadence on the song where he's kind of like,
his vocals on this song are honestly super impressive. On the chorus, he just fucking sells it.
Yeah, like he does this thing where he's like, and then he'll like hit this note all of a sudden.
Thanks,
like
boom power.
I was just doing a bit of light skating.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, he'll
use the toilet. Sorry.
I don't know that even. Anyway, he does that sort of little vocal cadence that he has throughout the song. And it's great. And then he hits this like, Betty, you can call me. I obviously can't do it. I'm tone deaf, but he's able to hit that. And it's just amazing. He's so dynamic as a performer, and that's awesome.
Be my bodyguard.
And I love like on terms of that, like really nimble style he has. I love the way that he kind of like, it's almost like, it's not rapping because he's not rapping, but he has that cadence at certain moments on this record where he's like just kind of locking into these little tiny holes in the grooves. One of my favorite songs in that regard is I Know What I Know, where he has this like really unconventional vocal melody, and also the Soweto vocals that are happening in the song as well are really like, unusual and exciting and awesome. And Paul is just kind of like weaving this story, New York story into this song. Like, she said, I don't know you from the cinematographer's party. I said, who am I to blow against the wind?
You all right there?
I don't know. Are you?
She said there's something about you that really reminds me of money. She's the kind of girl who would say things like that. Weren't that funny? I said, what does that mean? I really remind you of money. She said, who am I to blow against the wind?
I mean, can we make this video any better than all that?
I don't know what's funnier. The fact that you're like really, really close to a perfect impersonation, or the fact that it's just off enough to sound really funny.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be perfect, but yeah. I could probably do You Can Call Me Al pretty perfectly because I know that song really well. And I love the way he does
Memorable
the
music
verses
video
here.
with Chevy Chase and Paul Simon.
Oh, it's so good.
It's like watching Hagrid stand next to one of the kids in Hogwarts in the early Harry Potter film.
All right. Okay.
He's 7 feet taller than Paul Simon.
Here's my best shot. Man walks down the street. He says, why am I soft in the middle now? Why am I soft in the middle? The rest of my life is so hard. I need a photo opportunity. I want a shot of redemption. I want to end up a cartoon in a cartoon graveyard. Bone digger, bone. Okay, that's enough.
Boom,
yeah.
boom.
Yeah. But, Paul aside, I particularly want to shout out the South African singer, frontman of the band Ladysmith Black Mambazo, a man named Joseph Shabalala, and his role in this record vocally.
What a fucking name. Hell yeah.
What a king. His role in this record is quite pivotal. He contributes, he has a heavy hand in the writing of many songs on this record, including Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes, Under African Skies, and Homeless. And his vocals are the ones that feature prominently in these songs. And his awa, 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 she got diamonds on the soles of her shoes. It was so bad. That was so bad.
It was good enough for me.
Yes.
Oh god, but he's such a great vocal presence. I already mentioned Homeless, which is another of my favorite songs on this record. He's just like melts like butter when I listen to this song. It's so great. And it's awesome as well, like on this huge, platinum ass motherfucking record where you have numerous songs that are just like barely even in English. That's cool. That's dope as shit. Yeah, Under African Skies is great too. It's so light to the touch, if that makes sense, because it's just not like, it's barely there almost as a song, but then the detail is so intricate of what is there, and the production flourishes are so great. I love that shit to bits. I will say the only thing that holds this record back from perfection is that I do think it kind of loses steam a little bit towards the end. It's not that the last 3 tracks on this record don't quite have the thrilling detail, sweep, and hard-hitting quality of the music before them. Crazy Love Volume 2 sounds lovely, does feel a bit slight. That Was Your Mother is an irreverent, jazzy, sort of double-time shuffle song that I kind of like in concept, but also kind of feels a bit weird on this record. I feel like it's a musical idea that could have been finessed a bit more.
Maybe just sequenced a little better. Maybe?
Yeah. And then I have to focus in on my biggest gripe with this whole album, which is that you have this gorgeously ornate and organic sound all throughout it, right? Really lush, pretty, beautiful percussion and guitar and all of these things. And then you have the closing track, All Around the World. And the fucking drum sound on this song is fucking ass. I'm sorry. It sounds bad. It's so staticky. And it's like, that's not actually, I take it back. It's not ass in isolation. Like, it's fine. It just doesn't fit the sound of this record. And it's just the drum sound. The rest of the song is fine. The rest of the song is really good. But the drum sound on this track just does not fit the aesthetic of the rest of the album. And it's weird because it's the last song on the album too. So it really takes me out of it at this final crucial moment. And so it's a shame. That's my only real gripe about this record. And unfortunately, it's only gotten more intense the more time I've spent with it. It's just like, dude, why does it sound like that? Stop it. Let the dude with the fucking congas come back in. Anyway, it's a good song though. Lyrically, it does tie the album up in this really nice way. There's a kind of sense of longing across the sea, sort of lands, sort of nature to it. The myth of fingerprints motif is very well implemented and comes to a really sort of satisfying conclusion. The motif of the sun that opened up the record comes full circle here when he says the sun gets bloody and the sun goes down ever since the watermelon and the lights come up on the black pit town. Somebody says what's a better thing to do? Well, it's not just me and it's not just you. This is all around the world. So there's a kind of sense of unity that is communicated in the song without preaching or like getting into kind of platitudes. And I think that's a really great thing that Paul's able to do, is he's able to navigate the messages he wants to put across with this record, which is a communal sense of coming together, but also an awareness of the suffering of apartheid, which, this is the cusp of Live Aid, was going to happen soon. So that was, I think, again, this growing awareness in the West of the situation. But Paul's able to do all of this stuff and communicate all this stuff without ever going like, come on, brother, take my hand sort of bullshit that lesser songwriters would do. And that's the ultimate beauty.
Goodwill toward man.
Yeah. It's time to forget our misgivings with each other, says the white man who enslaved these people for hundreds of years.
Forget about our misgivings and the potential hundreds of years of reparations that I would owe you.
Yeah.
Imagine all the people.
Yeah. So that's the beauty of Graceland.
If somebody hadn't shot John Lennon, I would have done it.
That's the beauty of Graceland, is that in a landscape saturated with platitudes and very easy concessions to people, outside of the hegemonic Western landscape, you have this album that's genuine and meaningful and puts the craft and art of all those involved first. Mm-hmm. And it helps that it's a pop album written by one of the great songwriters of the latter half of the 20th century. And he proves that he is the only Western person who, in the sort of mainstream, who could have produced it. And it's great because it both elevates and lets the characters of its collaborators take center stage, but it also is entirely true to Paul himself as a performer and as a personality too. Like he's not trying to adjust his personality to be like, to fit this new world he's bringing in. He's just being a dude singing about things, and he's not trying to be guy. Yeah, he's not trying to be like fucking, who's a counterexample? I don't know. That's all I have to say about it anyway.
Yeah. Good.
It's fucking Graceland, motherfucker.
Going to Graceland.
I think if this episode has taught us all anything, it's that between the three of us, none of us have a good Paul Simon impression. New.
Yeah. Anyway, favorite tracks and ratings, Graceland.
3 favorite tracks are Graceland, You Can Call Me Al, and Under African Skies. Least favorite, like Tyler, I do have to agree and say that that final leg is just really what holds it back from being like a properly like masterful record in my eyes. So I think I'm gonna say I do have misgivings about the drums, but I will say That Was Your Mother feels like the most inessential song of these last 3, and I really don't think the record would lose much if it just didn't have it. So that, and I give it an 8.
Beautiful. Morgan.
My 3 favorites are You Can Call Me Al, Under African Skies, and I'll actually go with All Around the World, or The Myth of Fingerprints. in spite of the fact that the drums sound is questionable. Least favorite, probably Gum Boots. Now I'll also give it an 8 out of 10.
Baller. Okay. My 3 favorite tracks are Boy in the Bubble, Graceland, and Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. Actually, that fucking rules. Least favorite is All Around the World, unfortunately. But the album I'm going to give it an 8.5. So that
Mess around that standard deviation a little bit. Whip her into shape.
what you gonna fucking do about it, punk?
What the fuck?
Nothing, not a thing.
Okay.
And that gives it from the 3 of us an average of 8.2, which is pretty fucking good. Which actually, what did we give? So even though Jake wasn't here, although Jake did rate it, so got an 8.3. So 8.2 and 8.3. I think they're pretty well matched. TBH. So yeah, dope shit. Let us know what Graceland means to you in the comments below. If you think that we missed anything in our discussion of this record, or if there's any other people who are involved or music that is a part of the scene that this record borrows from that you want to shout out, let us know about that in the comments below as well. We're always keen to hear more. And yeah, we love hearing from you. Make sure you go check out our main episode this week on the new albums from The Killers and Boldy James and The Alchemist, plus our record club for this week on Los Campesinos album Hold On Now Youngster, my favorite album. Make sure you go check that out. If you aren't already, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and you've liked the video. It really helps us out a lot. We're moving slowly towards that 1,000 subscriber landmark, and every single person helps. So yeah, thank you very much. And as always, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Airbnb, belong anywhere.